So DHT gets a ton of hate online, mainly because of its role in male pattern baldness. One scroll through the front page of Google and you'll see tons of articles outlining different methods and ways to decrease levels of DHT for the purpose of keeping your hair. And now listen, I get it. I want to keep my hair as well. However, in this video, what I want to do is essentially make the case that DHT isn't all that bad, and on the contrary, might actually be good. So let's go ahead and dive right in. So DHT, otherwise known as Dihydrotestosterone, is an androgenic sex steroid whose production is catalyzed by the enzyme 5-alpha reductase from the hormone testosterone, but can also be produced through what has been termed the backdoor pathway, whereby DHT is produced from the conversion of progesterone into DHT instead of testosterone into DHT. Now, when compared to testosterone, DHT appears to have a 2 to 3 times stronger binding affinity for the androgen receptor, and also appears to disassociate from the androgen receptor about 5 times slower than testosterone, and because of this is considered to be about 5 to 10 times more potent than testosterone. Now, one of the reasons that DHT doesn't get nearly as much love as its younger brother testosterone is because, yes, of its probable role in male pattern baldness, but also because it primarily operates as a paracrine hormone as opposed to an endocrine hormone like testosterone. DHT appears to only be active and produced, or at least primarily produced and active in tissues that express the 5-alpha reductase enzyme. Now, because muscle tissue and fat tissue are very poor expressors of the 5-alpha reductase enzyme, very little DHT is active in these tissues, and therefore DHT is a really poor anabolic and fat loss agent, which is why no one really likes it. Now, even though DHT is primarily a paracrine hormone and produced in target tissues that do express the 5-alpha reductase enzyme, it should also be noted that the testes and adrenal glands do produce a little bit of it that does enter into circulation, and so even though circulating levels of DHT are around 1/10 of that of testosterone, because DHT is 5 to 10 times more potent at activating and continuing to activate the androgen receptor, there may be some level of endocrine function to DHT that really hasn't been identified yet. Now, when it comes to the roles of DHT in the body, its most well-established role is that of its role in the sexual differentiation of the male sexual organs during fetal development, as well as to some degree during puberty. And a lot of this understanding comes from the research of individuals that are born with a 5-alpha reductase deficiency. These men are often born with highly underdeveloped male genitalia and are often considered to be pseudo-hermaphrodites at birth. But what's interesting is that most of these men have completely normal amounts of muscle mass, which further demonstrates the lackluster potential of DHT as an anabolic agent. When you look at twins where one has a 5-alpha reductase deficiency and the other doesn't, they both have very similar physiques in terms of muscle mass and fat mass. And the reason for this is that testosterone is the primary androgenic hormonal driver for muscle growth and fat loss. Now, the reason for this, again, is because there's very little 5-alpha reductase that is expressed in muscle tissue and fat tissue, and so the conversion of testosterone into the more potent form of DHT just doesn't happen in these tissues. And the very little that does happen in these tissues gets rapidly broken down by other enzymes that break down DHT into further metabolites. However, what's even more interesting about these men that have a 5-alpha reductase deficiency is when they go through puberty, they typically also experience a normal male puberty experience, an increase in libido, an increase in sexual function, as well as just a general increase in the masculinization process, which goes to show you that testosterone is not just the primary driver for muscle mass and fat loss, but also for just the general masculinization process that occurs at puberty. And so because of this, if your primary goals are fat loss and muscle mass, as well as an increase in libido and fertility, testosterone is by far the most important hormone to be paying attention to. And so if you guys have never tested your testosterone before, a lot of you guys know that I'm a huge fan of my friends over at Let's Get Checked, which are one of the oldest sponsors on this channel. They have an awesome at-home testosterone test that is literally the easiest and cheapest way to test your testosterone levels. They literally send you a test to your doorstep. You collect your sample at home, you send it back to them, and then you have your results through their online portal just within a few days. And so if you guys are interested in something like this, make sure to check out the link down in the description for 25% off of your test. Now, even though you do see somewhat normal puberty and normal muscle mass and fat mass in individuals that have no DHT, one thing you do not see in these individuals is male pattern baldness, which is why DHT is so famous for its role in hair loss. Now, the role of DHT in male pattern baldness has been confirmed through several other lines of reasoning and several other lines of evidence. However, as outlined in this paper, the exact role that 5-alpha reductase in DHT plays in hair loss isn't exactly clear yet. There is still a lot of unanswered questions. For one, if DHT is the root cause of male pattern baldness, why do DHT levels decrease with age while the risk of balding increases with age? Why is there no association between DHT levels and the risk of balding? If DHT is the root cause of male pattern baldness, you would expect men with higher levels of DHT to also experience higher rates of male pattern baldness, but this is just not what you see. Well, one might say, well, it's not exactly DHT levels per se, but more so an increase in the expression of 5-alpha reductase, as well as DHT specifically in the scalp, and this is likely true. However, what is it that actually causes this increase in the expression of 5-alpha reductase? And why is it that an increase in the expression of 5-alpha reductase in other areas of the skin, like the face and the chest, actually cause an increase in hair growth? And why is it that only certain parts of the scalp seem to be sensitive to DHT? How is it that only some hair follicle androgen receptors become sensitive to DHT, but not others? And then what is the exact role of genetics in all of this? There have been numerous studies that have identified several genes strongly associated with an increase of male pattern baldness, the most relevant being the identification of a very specific androgen receptor gene. However, the exact role of this gene and the effects that it has on the androgen receptors in the scalp and in the rest of the body for that matter aren't exactly known. And so I don't say all of this to discount the effect that DHT has in male pattern baldness, but just to say that there's just a lot that hasn't been answered yet. Now, interestingly enough, there was a theory back in 2008 that was proposed that attempted to answer most, if not all, of these questions. And according to this theory, the primary cause of hair loss isn't necessarily DHT per se, but is initiated rather by the thinning of the scalp, specifically in areas that experience a lot of pressure. And because of this, the scalp tends to begin to express more 5-alpha reductase, not as a means to cause hair loss, but actually to initiate further hair growth in the presence of thinner skin. However, the issue here is that yes, DHT will cause further growth of hair follicles. However, it also causes further thinning of the scalp, which then causes more 5-alpha reductase to be expressed, which causes more thinning of the scalp, which eventually leads to an environment where hair just simply can't grow. Now, I don't know if this is true. To be honest, it's kind of above my pay grade, and it's extremely contended within the science and within the interwebs world. However, what we do know is that DHT does play some sort of role in the pathology of male pattern baldness, and because of this, the most effective way to prevent it or even reverse it is to implement strategies, methods, and drugs that inhibit the 5-alpha reductase and stops the conversion of testosterone into DHT, specifically in the scalp. And so it's at this point that most guys start asking, well, what drugs are out there that I can take, and should I take drugs to limit the conversion of testosterone into DHT by inhibiting the 5-alpha reductase enzyme? And in order to answer that question, you also have to ask the question, Well, are there any side effects to taking drugs like finasteride, like dutasteride, that do potently inhibit the conversion of testosterone into DHT? And this is where things get super controversial. However, at the heart of the issue is the question of whether or not DHT plays any role whatsoever in male adult biology. And according to the official statement of the NIH, quote, DHT does not play any significant role in the normal physiology of adults. However, when you look at the evidence and you look at the literature, there is a fair amount of literature to the contrary. And so what I want to do in the next portion of this video is walk through that literature. Now, the first place I want to look are at studies where they are investigating the effects of endogenously produced DHT. In this study, the researchers concluded that DHT is responsible for the maintenance of the prostate gland, which does seem to impact semen production even into adulthood. And in this study, the researchers concluded that higher DHT levels correspond with higher sexual activity and libido, which does seem to indicate that DHT may play a role in sexual function in adulthood. And in this study, the researchers concluded that DHT levels are associated with male aggression during adulthood, which does seem to indicate that DHT may play a role in neurological function at some degree during adulthood. And then in this study, the researchers concluded that DHT may mediate some certain aspects of cognition through DHT's metabolism into various neurosteroids. Now, all of these studies are simply association studies and doesn't necessarily mean that DHT per se is causing these effects. It may just be simply a correlation with testosterone levels. Men that typically have higher DHT levels also have higher testosterone levels, and so this may just simply be an association with testosterone and DHT and these different biological effects. However, it is certainly possible that DHT does play some sort of role in adult male biology, and this idea is further evidenced by men that are given exogenous DHT. In this study in particular, where the men were given exogenous DHT, the researchers concluded that, quote, we conclude that 3 months treatment with transdermal dihydrotestosterone gel demonstrated expected androgenic effects, short-term safety, and limited improvement in lower limb muscle strength, but no change in physical functioning or cognitive function. And then in this study, the researchers concluded that the results suggest that beneficial changes in cognition can occur in hypogonadal men using testosterone placement levels and DHT treatment, and these changes in cognition can be reliably measured during a relative steady state dose level. Further, our results suggest that aromatization of testosterone into estrogen may regulate verbal memory in men, whereas non-aromatizable androgens like DHT may regulate spatial memory. The authors go on to conclude that because DHT cannot be aromatized into estrogen, the improvement in spatial memory is likely a direct androgenic effect rather than an indirect effect from an increase in estrogen. A significant decrease in testosterone levels was also observed, suggesting that DHT may have effects on cognition independent of testosterone. And then in this study, the researchers concluded that, quote, transdermal administration of DHT improves sexual function and may be a useful alternative for androgen replacement. As estrogens are thought to play a role in the pathogenesis of prostate hyperplasia, DHT may be beneficial compared with aromatizing androgens in the treatment of aging men. And in this study, the researchers found that there was an improvement in libido in men that received exogenous DHT, an increase in lean body mass, a decrease in fat mass, and improvements in spatial cognition and mood. And this study found that men given DHT had an increase in hemoglobin levels, an increase in serum creatine levels, an increase in lean mass, but a decrease in fat mass. Now, one of the reasons I find these studies to be so interesting is that, yes, it's interesting that DHT given to these men did improve things like libido and mood and cognition and even things like muscle mass in some of those studies. But the real reason these are so interesting is because when you give men DHT, it completely crushes testosterone production. And so the big question here is, why is it that when you give men DHT, a hormone that's not supposed to be responsible for any of those functions and actually destroys the hormone that is supposed to be responsible for things like libido and mood and muscle mass. Why is it that these men are experiencing these benefits? And so keeping this in mind, I do want to also look at some studies that were specifically looking into the side effect profiles of finasteride and dutasteride. And in this study in particular, the researchers concluded that, quote, both finasteride and dutasteride were similarly associated with depression with a constant risk over time, while neither drug was associated with suicide. Prescribing clinicians and potential users should be aware of the possible risk for depression associated with 5-alpha reductase use. And in this study, the researchers concluded that, quote, sexual adverse effects such as decreased libido, erectile dysfunction, and a decreased ejaculate have been reported in as many as 3.6 to 15.8% of men. And in this study, the researchers concluded that the use of 5-alpha reductase inhibitors carried a 1.57-fold risk of sexual dysfunction and a relative risk of 1.66 for finasteride and 1.37 for dutasteride. And in this study, the researchers concluded that, quote, overall, 5-alpha reductase inhibitors determine an increased risk of hypoactive sexual desire and erectile dysfunction. And then there's this study where the authors found changes in the androgen receptor density and the nerve density in the genitals of individuals that experienced long-term finasteride side effects. Now, again, it's not exactly clear whether or not the side effects that are associated with finasteride and dutasteride are caused by these drugs or are simply an association. It is entirely possible that men that are prone to male pattern baldness and prone to prostate issues are also prone to issues with libido, issues with mood disorders, and the such. And as many others have pointed out over the years, there are a number of other issues with these specific studies that are looking into the side effects of finasteride and dutasteride. And so I don't really want to dive and spend a ton of time on this issue simply because this is not the primary discussion of this video. However, with all things considered, when you look at the research in men that are producing DHT endogenously, coupled with the evidence of men that are given exogenous DHT, it does appear that DHT does play some sort of minor role in things like libido, sexual function, mood, as well as cognitive function. Now, this is not to say that you should not take those drugs if they are prescribed by your doctor. Again, this is not the point of the video. My only point of this video is to outline my reasoning as to why I believe endogenously produced DHT does have some level of positive benefit in men. And because of this, I want to spend the rest of this video talking about natural ways to augment the natural production of DHT. Now, there isn't a ton of really high quality good research on this topic quite yet. However, what does exist, I did want to walk through. And the first thing I want to walk through is the fact that a low-fat, high-fiber diet appears to lower DHT levels. Now, it's not exactly clear whether or not this is secondarily to it also decreasing testosterone levels when you take men and put them on a low-fat, high-fiber diet. It not only lowers DHT levels, but also testosterone, which makes sense. Testosterone being the precursor to DHT, when you lower the substrate that's available for DHT production, it's going to lower DHT levels. And so if you are trying to optimize your DHT levels and your testosterone levels, one of the better methods is to just simply implement a higher fat, lower fiber diet to allow for proper testosterone production so that you can have available substrates available to produce DHT when needed. Now, when it comes to supplements that can decrease DHT levels, the only supplement that I'm aware of that has any clinical evidence whatsoever for its possibility to reduce DHT levels is Fenugreek, and is typically why I'm not a huge fan of Fenugreek. Now, it does have its rightful place in possibly in men that are trying to lower DHT levels for the purpose of reducing prostate growth or preventing male pattern baldness. However, for the average guy that's just typically trying to optimize their hormonal profile, feel good, perform well, taking Fenugreek probably isn't going to be one of your better bets. However, if you fall into that former category of men that are trying to lower DHT, Fenugreek appears to be one of your better options, simply because, yes, it might decrease DHT levels, but it also appears to improve libido, which is a nice additive there. Now, when it comes to supplements that have been shown to increase DHT levels, again, there's not a ton of good clinical data here, but there is a little bit. And the first one that we want to look at is zinc. Now, when you give infertile men zinc, it does appear to raise their DHT levels. However, it's not exactly clear whether or not this is just simply from optimizing testosterone levels. And the reason I say that is when you look at the effects of zinc in high concentrations on 5-alpha reductase, zinc actually appears to reduce 5-alpha reductase expression and reduce DHT creation. And so it does appear that the increase in DHT levels from taking something like zinc is simply in men that are deficient in zinc and have low testosterone because of that deficiency. And then giving those men zinc appears to then restore testosterone production, but also restore DHT production. And then there are things like creatine, which is pretty interesting in this regard. And the reason for that is because of the one lone study that did show a massive increase in DHT levels. And this is kind of where creatine gets its legendary status as causing hair loss. Now, this hasn't been exactly proven yet, and there's no further studies that have demonstrated that creatine can in fact increase DHT levels. But what's interesting here about this study is that creatine didn't seem to increase testosterone by that much, roughly by like 10%, but did increase DHT levels massively, which does seem to suggest that creatine has a direct stimulatory effect either on 5-alpha reductase or an inhibitory effect on the enzymes that break DHT down. And then there are herbal supplements such as tribulus and another one called Butea superba, which I hope I'm saying that one right, that I get a lot of comments down in the comment section about. And tribulus does appear to slightly increase DHT and may be one of the reasons why it improves libido so well. Tribulus is a super old school supplement that a lot of guys used to take post-cycle in order to recover their libido, and it does appear to be fairly beneficial in that regard. Now, this may be because of an increase in DHT, but it may also be because of the fact that tribulus also increases a lot of the neurotransmitters that are responsible for an increase in libido. And then when it comes to Butea superba, there is one lone case study that did show that one guy that was taking it had super high DHT levels and super high libido. And there does appear to be some rodent data and in vitro research that does seem to suggest that Butea superba may have some level of androgenic effect. However, these studies are extremely preliminary, and I wouldn't put a ton of weight on them at this moment. Now, interestingly enough, nicotine and caffeine also appear to be stimulatory in regards to DHT production through various metabolic pathways. And so, again, there are a handful of methods that you can implement to possibly increase DHT levels if that's something that you want to do. But there, again, just isn't a ton of research, and I wouldn't put a ton of weight on these specific compounds in order to increase and improve DHT production. production. Now, with all of that being said, there are also a handful of other supplements and food products that do appear to have some level of inhibitory properties on 5-alpha reductase. These largely are in vitro studies, and there isn't really any research on their effects on DHT, but they may have some appreciable effect on DHT levels. And because there's so many of them, I'm just going to throw them up on the screen here. There is a ton of compounds that are typically found in plants and mushrooms that do in fact appear to, in some cases, potently inhibit the 5-alpha reductase enzyme. And so if you're somebody who is trying to not hinder 5-alpha reductase or DHT production, or trying to optimize your DHT levels, I would forego and try to avoid some of these foods, or at least avoid consuming them on a regular basis. And this is typically the approach that I personally take. I typically don't really leverage any one particular method to try to increase DHT levels, but I do try to avoid food products and supplements that hinder DHT production. In my personal opinion, I think it's far more practical to just simply optimize your testosterone production and then just allow your body to create the DHT that it needs. And by doing this, you, one, optimize testosterone production, but also will secondarily optimize just overall androgen signaling. Now, if you haven't seen my full breakdown on how to leverage dietary measures to optimize testosterone production, make sure to check out this video here, as well as the links down in the description for 25% off of an at-home testosterone test. But other than that, I will see you guys in the next video.